prime forest, the fledgling agency is understaffed and ill-equipped. It is completely unprepared for what is to come.
Why was 1910 so important to fire? What happened that season?
When the fires come in 1910, it's late in the season. They really believe the fire season's over. And all of a sudden, they had some series of fires burning, and the winds began to pick up. The descriptions of those fires, of how the sky was alight at night, and the smoke for covering much of the United States, the speed, it was absolutely terrifying. It moved so fast, people could not even get out of the way. They describe it as the end of the world. In the end, they couldn't do anything with it. And the fire went out when winter came, and it snowed, and the rains came in the fall. They burned 3.5 million acres. The Forest Service said, all right, this is the moral equivalent of war for us. And fire became the enemy.
The Great Fires of 1910 transform America's relationship with fire. That same year, President William Howard Taft gives the Forest Service a clear mandate. It will be up to them to build the Army and create the strategy for the war on wildfire.
As we built our firefighting mechanism, one of the things that we found out is if we get to a fire quickly, when it's small, if we can put it out. And if it gets large, it becomes progressively more difficult up to the point that it becomes impossible. Most of the national forest in those days didn't have any roads in it. So somebody came up with the idea that we had aircraft, and perhaps a quick way to get people into a fire was via parachuting into it.
The first aerial firefighters, smoke jumpers, take off from Missoula, Montana on July 10, 1940. Smoke jumpers quickly earn a reputation as the toughest firefighters in the business.
These guys became the elite firefighters. When they jumped out of airplanes, which most of us don't have the nerve to do, they fought fire, which most of us don't have the nerve to do. They did it in very isolated circumstances and situations where it required some people of real physical strength and really believing in themselves and their team. They became the elite.
Check, make sure these buckles are engaged correctly.
You should go to some of their reunions. Once a smoke jumper, always a smoke jumper. They were the elite, and they still are.
Today, at the U.S. Forest Service smoke jumping base in Missoula, Montana, the can-do attitude is everywhere. Smoke jumpers learn it from day one. You can't jump out of a plane into a fire without it. This community is as tight-knit as the Prineville Hotshots. Losing one of their own on Storm King has affected them deeply.
Everyone here, from rookie to old hand, had an opinion about the official report. Veteran Laird Robinson gave it to me straight.
I was astonished, and I was blown away by the official report of the Storm King fire, that can-do attitude was a problem. Smoke jumping wouldn't be where it is today without a can-do attitude. And I have a hard time understanding if you don't have a can-do attitude, how can you be elite? You can still be safe and get the job done. You have to have a can-do attitude.
It's obvious the can-do attitude is an integral part of being a smoke jumper. But maybe, on July 6, 1994, on Storm King Mountain, they pushed it too far. Why? How could they have forgotten safety? After all, safety was the most important lesson to come out of the greatest tragedy in smoke jumper history. The Man Gulch Fire in Montana.
On an August afternoon in 1949, a call comes into the base in Missoula. There's a small fire 100 miles away in the Helena National Forest. 16 jumpers are assigned. From the air, the fire looks manageable enough. As the jumpers float to Earth, it is hard to imagine that within 2 hours, most of these young men will be dead. Journalist John McLean has returned to the family cabin in Montana, where his father, Norman McLean, wrote much of his classic book, Young Men and Fire.
One of the things I grew up with was that my father had been in the Forest Service when he was very young. He was a firefighter. He was on a fire. The fire blew up, and he was frantic, didn't know what to do. He realized at that moment that his fate was in his own hands, and if he didn't do something about it, he was going to be dead in his boots. Now, that's pretty hard when you're young, and it marked him the rest of his life.
For John's father, the tragedy of Man Gulch in 1949 reawakened vivid memories of his own near-death experience. But the inspiration to write came late.
Well, my father was my father, and I think that he was an oddball. He was doing the research on a difficult outdoor story when he was 80 years old. Now that's odd. What's even odder or more miraculous is that he brought it off.
Young Men and Fire is a masterful account of a tragedy that should never have happened again.
This coming part of the story, then, is the quest to find the full story of the Man Gulch Fire, to find what of it was once known and was then scattered and buried.
I arrived in Helena with the crew of 7, and I had first thought that we were going in to rescue 2 guys that were burned.
I enlisted 3 veteran jumpers to take me through the events of August 1949. If anyone understood what happened at Man Gulch, it was these men. By taking me back to that tragedy, maybe they could help me figure out what went wrong a half-century later at Storm King.
We were never, your father and I, conclusively convinced that Hellman made that
Laird
statement.
Robinson was my father's friend and research partner on Young Men and Fire.
They weren't sure that anybody was even left in there that was alive, so...
But for a twist of fate, Homer Skip Stratton would have jumped with the crew that day on Man Gulch. Instead, he had the grim task of removing the bodies.
And I assigned him the job of maintenance foreman for the project.
Fred Brower was the foreman at the base that summer. He assigned the crew that jumped into Man Gulch.
The crew started up the side of the gulch toward the fire.